The sun was slow and soft over the wide land the day she came to town. Her name was Maeve, and she had red hair that looked like it had caught fire from the sun. She had come from far away from Ireland to start again, because her old life had broken her heart. She said little and smiled in a small way that made people wonder what she was hiding inside. She got a job at the small diner near the road that led to the cowboy ranches. She cleaned tables, served coffee, and kept to herself. The cowboy came in one morning when the light was still low. His name was Cole. He was tall, quiet, and wore a brown hat that looked old, but fit his head like it was made for him. His boots made a soft sound on the wooden floor as he walked in. He looked like a man who had seen more sun than sleep. He sat at the far corner and ordered black coffee and eggs. When Maeve brought it to him, he looked up and saw her green eyes. Something in him stopped. He did not know what it was, but he could not look away. Maeve felt his eyes on her and turned a little shy. She said in her soft Irish voice, "You want more sugar?" He shook his head and said, "No, ma'am." She nodded and walked off fast. But his eyes followed her again. Every time she moved across the diner, he found himself watching. Days went by and Cole came back again and again. Always the same seat, always the same order. Maeve began to notice the small things about him. The way he held his cup with both hands when he thought. The way he smiled only when she was near. The way he looked out the window as if he was talking to someone who wasn't there. One day, it rained hard, and only one customer came in, Cole. He took off his wet hat and shook it dry. Maeve laughed for the first time since she came to town. "You'll catch cold, cowboy," she said. He smiled and said, "I've had worse." They both laughed a little. The rain kept falling and they kept talking. She told him she came from Ireland, that she used to have a small shop with her mother, that it closed after her mother passed. He listened like every word was gold. He told her he worked on a horse ranch a few miles out. He said he liked the quiet more than the noise of people. When she was closing the diner that night, he stayed to help her sweep the floor. She told him, "You don't need to do that." He said, "I don't mind." She smiled again. Then there was silence for a moment. Maeve looked down and said, "I am nothing special." Her voice was small, like she was afraid of the words. Cole looked at her long and slow and said, "Then why can't I look away?" Maeve felt something move inside her heart. It scared her a little, but also made her warm. The rain stopped outside. Cole put on his hat and said, "Good night, Maeve." She whispered, "Good night, cowboy." When she locked the door and looked out the window, she saw him walking into the dark road. And she smiled to herself, because for the first time in a long time, she did not feel alone. The next morning, the sun rose soft and gold over the small town. Maeve came early to the diner to set the tables and warm the coffee pots. Her heart felt light for reasons she could not name. She tried not to think about Cole, but his face kept showing up in her mind. She could still hear his voice when he said, "Why can't I look away?" It made her blush every time she remembered. Cole was already awake at his ranch, brushing down a brown horse named Daisy. He kept thinking about the Irish woman with red hair and green eyes. He had seen many women before, but none like her. There was something about her that made him quiet inside. He told himself he would not go to the diner that day, but his hands still found the road there. When he walked in, Maeve looked up from behind the counter and smiled without meaning to. He nodded at her and sat down in his usual spot. She brought him coffee and said softly, "Morning, cowboy." He said, "Morning, Maeve." There was a small silence that did not feel empty. A few men from town came in and teased Maeve for her accent. She laughed it off, but one of them said something rude, and Cole looked up sharp. He said in a calm voice, "That's enough, Hank." The man laughed but stopped when he saw Cole's eyes. Maeve looked at Cole, thankful and a bit shy. After they left, Maeve said, "You didn't have to do that." Cole said, "I know. But I wanted to." She looked down and said, "People been saying things to me all my life. I'm used to it." Cole said, "Well, I don't like it." They looked at each other for a long moment. Something quiet and strong passed between them. That evening after work, Maeve walked home along the dirt road with a small umbrella in her hand. She saw Cole waiting with his horse near the fence. He said, "You walking home alone?" She nodded. He said, "Let me ride with you." She smiled and said, "You can, if Daisy doesn't mind." He laughed and said she likes company. They walked together slowly as the sun went down. Cole talked about his ranch, about the horses he raised, and how he came to town years ago with nothing. Maeve listened with soft eyes. She told him about her village in Ireland, the green hills, the small bakery she worked in, and how she missed the sea smell. They stopped near a small bridge. The wind blew her hair across her face, and Cole reached out without thinking and tucked it behind her ear. She froze and looked up at him. He pulled his hand back fast and said sorry. She shook her head and whispered, "Don't be." They stood there a long time as the light faded. Then Maeve said, "I should go." Cole nodded and said, "I'll see you tomorrow." She smiled and said, "You always do." When she reached home, she sat by her small window and looked out at the stars. She whispered to herself, "I am nothing special," but deep inside, she hoped the cowboy would look her way again. And miles away on his ranch, Cole sat by the fire and thought the same thing he thought the night before. He whispered, "Why can't I look away?" The next few days passed slow and warm. Maeve and Cole began to see each other almost every morning. He came for coffee before going to the ranch, and she waited for him without saying it out loud. Sometimes they talked about small things like the weather or the horses. Other times they just smiled and said nothing. It felt easy and calm. One morning Maeve came to work early and found a small bunch of wild flowers left by the window of the diner. There was no name on it, just a piece of paper that said, "Hope your day's kind." She smiled and knew who it was from. When Cole came in later, she looked at him and said, "You left something by the window." He smiled and said, "Maybe Daisy did." She laughed and said, "Then tell Daisy I said thank you." That was the first time Maeve laughed out loud since she moved to America. The sound made the diner owner look up and smile too. Cole watched her laugh and felt like the whole place got brighter. Later that day, a storm came fast and heavy. The wind blew hard and the sky turned grey. Maeve was closing early when she saw Cole come running in soaked with rain. "Storm's bad," he said, catching his breath. "Roads might flood." Maeve looked worried and said, "You shouldn't have come." He said, "Couldn't let you walk home in this." They waited together inside while the rain hit the roof. Maeve made hot coffee for both of them. They sat by the window and watched the rain fall like a curtain. Cole said, "I like the rain. It makes the world quiet." Maeve nodded and said, "In Ireland it rained almost every day. I used to sit by the window with my mum and count the drops." She stopped talking and her eyes went soft. Cole said, "You miss her?" Maeve nodded. "Every day," she whispered. Cole didn't say anything. He just reached out and put his hand gently over hers. She didn't pull away. She felt warm inside, even though the wind was cold. The storm lasted long, and by the time it stopped it was dark. Cole said, "You can't walk home now. Let me take you to the ranch. You can stay in the guest room." Maeve looked unsure, but she saw the care in his eyes. She nodded slowly and said, "All right, cowboy." They rode through the wet roads on his horse Daisy. Maeve held on tight as the wind blew around them. When they reached the ranch, Cole helped her down. She looked around at the quiet land and the soft lights from the stable. It felt peaceful. Inside the ranch house, the fire was already burning. Cole brought her a towel and said, "You can dry off. I'll make us some soup." Maeve smiled and said, "You cook too," he said sometimes. They sat by the fire eating warm soup and talking about small things again. Maeve told him how she dreamed of owning a bakery one day in America. Cole told her how he wanted to build a new stable for the horses. When she started to feel sleepy, he showed her to the guest room. Before she went in, she turned and said, "Thank you, Cole, for the flowers, for the soup, for not letting me walk alone." He smiled and said, "You're welcome, Maeve." As she closed the door, she whispered to herself, "Maybe I am a little special after all." And from the other side, Cole whispered to himself, "She's more than special." Maeve woke up early the next morning to the sound of birds outside the ranch window. The air smelled fresh and clean after the storm. She looked around the small guest room. It was simple but warm, with a small table, a lamp, and a blanket that smelled faintly like hay and soap. For the first time in a long time she felt safe. She smiled quietly to herself. When she stepped out, Cole was already in the kitchen, cooking eggs and toast. He turned when he saw her and said, "Morning, Maeve." She smiled and said, "Morning, cowboy." He poured her coffee and said, "Sleep all right?" She nodded and said, "Like a baby." They both laughed a little. After breakfast, Maeve followed him outside to see the ranch. The sky was blue and wide, and the grass still wet with drops of rain. Horses grazed lazily near the fence. Maeve gasped softly. "They're beautiful," she said. Cole smiled. "You like horses?" She said, "I've never been close to one before." He said, "Then come on." He led her to Daisy, the brown horse that had carried them the night before. Maeve reached out slowly and touched her neck. "She's soft," Maeve whispered. Cole said, "She likes you." Maeve smiled and said, "I like her too." Cole watched her gently stroke the horse's mane. There was something calm and kind in the way she moved. It made him feel quiet inside. Later they went to the barn, where Cole showed her the small stable he wanted to rebuild. He said, "This is where I spend most of my days." Maeve looked around and said, "It feels peaceful." He nodded and said, "Sometimes it's too quiet. Gets lonely out here." She looked at him and said softly, "I know that feeling." They worked together that day, cleaning the barn and feeding the horses. Maeve's laughter filled the air again. Cole found himself smiling more than he had in years. When the sun began to set, they sat on the fence, watching the sky turn orange and pink. Maeve said, "Back home I used to sit by the sea and watch the sunset. It looked a bit like this." Cole said, "Maybe you can watch it here now." She turned to him and smiled. "Maybe I can." They were quiet for a while. Then Cole said, "I never thought someone like you would end up in a small town like this." Maeve said, "Someone like me." He nodded. "Kind, brave, funny." She looked down and whispered, "I'm none of those. I told you I'm nothing special." Cole looked at her and said softly, "You keep saying that. But every time you walk into a room, the whole place feels different." "I don't know what that means, Maeve, but I can't look away." Maeve felt her heart beat fast. She wanted to say something, but no words came. She just smiled and looked at the sky. Cole turned and looked at her again, like he was trying to remember her face forever. When it got dark, he walked her back inside. She said, "Thank you for letting me stay." He said, "You can stay any time." She smiled. "Careful, cowboy. I might take you up on that." He chuckled. "I hope you do." That night Maeve lay in bed listening to the wind. She thought about the cowboy, the horses, and the ranch. She thought about how kind he was and how he looked at her like she mattered. For the first time in years, she didn't feel broken. And somewhere in the other room, Cole sat by the fire thinking the same thing. That maybe, just maybe, something good was starting. Maeve woke up early again the next morning to the smell of coffee. She smiled when she remembered where she was. The sound of horses outside made her heart calm. When she stepped into the kitchen, Cole was already sitting with 2 mugs of coffee. He looked up and smiled. "Morning sunshine," he said. Maeve laughed softly. "That's new," he said. "Well, you're the only sunshine this ranch has seen in a long time." She blushed and said, "Stop it, cowboy." After breakfast, Maeve helped Cole feed the horses. She liked the way he talked to them like they were his friends. She asked, "Do they understand you?" He smiled and said, "Maybe not the words, but they understand the heart." Maeve nodded slowly. "That's beautiful," she said. Cole looked at her and said, "You understand hearts to Maeve." She turned away shyly and said, "I just try to be kind." Later that day, Cole had to ride into town to buy supplies. Maeve said she would come along and help carry things. The two of them rode together on Daisy. The road was quiet and full of soft dust that rose behind them. Maeve held on to Cole's back and felt his heartbeat. It was strong and steady, like the sound of hooves on dirt. In town, people looked at them curiously. Some smiled, some whispered. Maeve didn't mind. She was starting to care less about what people thought. Cole bought hay ropes and tools. Maeve helped pick apples and bread from the store. The old storekeeper smiled and said, "You to make a good pair." Cole looked down and Maeve turned red. She said, "We're just friends." The old man said, "That's how it always starts." When they rode back, Maeve laughed about it. "You hear that?" she said. Cole smiled and said, "Old Tom likes to talk too much." Maeve teased, "You didn't say." He was wrong though. Cole smiled without answering. Back at the ranch they put away the supplies. Maeve baked a small pie with the apples she bought. When she gave Cole a piece, he said, "That's the best thing I've tasted in years." She said, "Then you've been eating the wrong pies." They both laughed. As night came, they sat outside by the fence again. The stars were bright like tiny fires in the sky. Maeve leaned against the fence post and said, "It's quiet here. Peaceful." Cole said, "That's what I like about it. The world slows down." Maeve said softly, "I think I was always running before. Running from pain, from memories, from people who hurt me." Cole looked at her gently. "You don't have to run anymore, Maeve." She looked at him and asked, "Why do you care so much?" He said, "Because you remind me what it feels like to care again." Maeve didn't know what to say. She just smiled and looked at the stars. Cole looked at her and thought to himself that she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. When it was time to sleep, Maeve said, "Good night, cowboy." He said, "Good night, Irish girl." She laughed and said, "That's new too." He said, "So is this feeling?" She looked at him for a long second, then walked inside with a soft smile. Cole watched her go and whispered to himself, "Why can't I look away?" The next morning, Maeve woke up before the sun. She liked hearing the soft sounds of the ranch waking up. The horses moved gently in their stalls, and the wind carried the smell of hay through the open window. She got up and went outside barefoot, just to feel the earth. Cole saw her from the barn and smiled. "You're up early," he said. Maeve turned and said, "Couldn't sleep. The morning felt too quiet to waste." Cole nodded and said, "You want to help me with the horses today?" She said, "I'd love to." Together they worked through the morning, brushing the horses, feeding them, and cleaning the stalls. Maeve laughed when one of the horses sneezed on her. Cole laughed too and said, "Guess he likes you." Maeve wiped her face and said, "Well, that's one way to say hello." They worked until the sun was high. Cole handed Maeve a bottle of water and said, "You work hard." She said, "Hard work feels good when it's for something real." Cole looked at her and said softly, "You make this place feel real again." Maeve blushed and looked away. "You talk like that, and I won't know what to say," she murmured. Cole smiled. "Then don't say anything, just stay." She looked at him and said, "Stay." He nodded. "I could use some help around here. And it'd be nice having someone to talk to who isn't a horse." Maeve laughed. "Are you sure? I might talk more than your horses do." Cole said, "I'd take that any day." She thought for a moment and then said, "All right, cowboy, I'll stay." That evening, Maeve moved her small bag from the diner room to the ranch house. She took the guest room again, but it felt different now, like it belonged to her a little too. She cooked dinner for them both. Something simple but warm. Cole said, "If you keep cooking like this, I'll never let you leave." She smiled and said, "You already said I could stay." He said, "Good. Then it's settled." After dinner they walked outside again. The moon was big and bright. Maeve said, "I can't remember the last time I felt this happy." Cole said, "You deserve to be happy, Maeve." She said, "So do you." They sat on the fence quietly for a while. The night was soft around them. Maeve said, "Back home, we used to say, when the moon shines onto people, it means they're meant to meet." Cole looked at her and said, "Then I'm glad the moon found us." Maeve smiled and looked up at the sky. "Maybe it did," she said. When it got late, they said good night. Cole went to his room, but couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about her laugh, her voice, her eyes. He whispered to himself again, "Why can't I look away?" And in the next room, Eve lay awake thinking about the cowboy who made her heart feel alive again. She smiled in the dark and whispered maybe I'm something after all. Morning came slow and gentle over the ranch. Maeve was already outside feeding the chickens when Cole stepped out of the barn. He smiled when he saw her. "You're becoming a real ranch girl," he said. Maeve laughed and said, "Don't tease me. I still jump when a horse sneezes." Cole grinned. "You'll get used to it." They ate breakfast on the porch that morning. The air smelled like fresh grass and warm bread. Maeve poured in coffee and said, "I still can't believe I'm living on a ranch." Cole said, "You make it better just by being here." Maeve rolled her eyes, but smiled. "You always know what to say, don't you?" Cole said, "Not always. But with you the words come easy." After breakfast, Cole showed her how to ride Daisy properly. Maeve was nervous at first. "She's so tall," she said. Cole stood beside her and said, "Don't worry. I got you." He helped her climb up and held the reins with her. "Now breathe," he said softly. "Let her feel your calm." Maeve nodded and took a deep breath. Daisy started moving slowly. Maeve laughed. "I'm doing it," Cole said. "Told you." They rode around the field together. The sun shone bright and the sky looked endless. Maeve felt free. When they stopped, she looked at Cole and said, "I think I could stay here forever." He said, "Then stay." That afternoon, they fixed the fence together. Maeve handed him nails while he hammered. They joked and teased each other until they were both laughing so hard they had to stop working. Cole said, "You know you've changed this place." Maeve asked how. He said, "It feels lighter, feels like home again." She looked at him quietly and said, "Maybe that's what we both needed, a place that feels like home." When evening came, they sat by the fire outside. Maeve cooked beans and corn over the small flame. Cole told her stories about his childhood, how his father taught him to ride, and how his mother used to sing while cooking. Maeve listened with a smile. She told him about the Irish songs her mother used to hum while baking bread. Cole said, "I'd like to hear you sing sometime." Maeve laughed. "I only sing when no one's listening." Cole said, "Then I'll close my ears." She laughed again. Later, when the stars came out, Maeve said softly, "I think my mum would have liked you." Cole looked surprised. "You think so?" Maeve nodded. She liked people who were good inside. "And you are?" Cole looked at her for a long time. "I don't know if I am. But I'm trying." Maeve said, "That's enough." The next day, the air was cool and bright. Maeve woke up humming without even noticing. She felt light inside, like her heart was smiling. She made breakfast for Cole before he came in from the barn. When he walked through the door and smelled the food, he laughed and said, "You're spoiling me, Irish girl." Maeve smiled and said, "Maybe I just don't like seeing hungry cowboys." He said, "Then I must be the luckiest one alive." After breakfast, Cole said he needed to check the far pasture and asked if Maeve wanted to come. She nodded fast. "Of course," she said. They rode together on Daisy again. This time Maeve held her own reins. She was steadier now, more confident. Cole looked at her and smiled with pride. "You're a natural," he said. Maeve said, "I just have a good teacher." They reached the far pasture, where wildflowers grew near the fence. Maeve got down and picked one. She said, "This place is beautiful." Cole said, "I come here when I need to think." Maeve asked, "What do you think about?" Cole said, "Mostly about life. Sometimes about what I lost. Sometimes about what I've found." Maeve looked at him softly. "What did you lose?" He was quiet for a moment. "My brother," he said. "He passed 5 years ago. We used to work this ranch together." Maev's voice went low. "I'm sorry, Cole," he nodded. "He was my best friend." She reached out and touched his arm. "He'd be proud of what you're doing now." Cole said, "Maybe. But it's easier to breathe with you here." Maeve felt her heart ache for him. She said, "I lost my mother not long before I came here. She was everything to me." Cole said, "Guess we both carry ghosts." Maeve nodded. "Yes, but maybe our ghosts brought us together." They stood there for a long time in the field with the wind blowing soft around them. Cole said, "I never talk about him to anyone. I don't know why I told you." Maeve said, "Maybe because you know I'll listen." When they got back to the ranch, the sun was high. Maeve made them lunch and Cole fixed a broken wheel on the wagon. They worked side by side like they had done it 4 years. It felt easy. It felt right. That evening Cole took his guitar from inside and began to play on the porch. Maeve sat on the steps listening. The tune was soft and slow. She said, "That's beautiful." He said, "My mother taught me." Maeve smiled. "Will you teach me too?" Cole said, "Only if you promise not to laugh when I sing." Maeve said, "Only if you promise to sing." He laughed and started singing quietly. His voice was deep and warm. Maeve closed her eyes and listened. It felt like the world stopped for a while. When he finished, she said, "You have a good heart, Cole." He said, "You make it better." The wind blew softly through her hair. Cole reached out and brushed a strand from her face. She looked at him, and for a moment neither spoke. Then Maeve whispered, "I don't know what this is between us." Cole said, "Maybe it's what we both needed to find." Maeve smiled and looked away shyly. "Maybe," she said. That night, when she went to bed, she looked out the window at the moon again. She whispered to herself, "I am nothing special." But deep inside, she knew he saw her differently. And in his room Cole whispered again, "Why can't I look away?" The next few days passed with a kind of quiet happiness that Maeve had never known before. Every morning she and Cole worked together on the ranch. She learned to saddle horses, gather hay, and ride without fear. Sometimes they talked and sometimes they just worked side by side in silence. But even in silence, it felt like their hearts were speaking. One morning, Cole found Maeve sitting on the porch reading a small old book. "What you got there?" he asked. Maeve smiled and said, "It's my mum's cookbook. I brought it all the way from Ireland." Cole sat beside her and said, "You planning to make something from it?" She laughed and said, "Maybe someday, when I'm brave enough to cook like she did." Cole smiled and said, "You're already brave, Maeve." Maeve shook her head softly. "No, I'm not. I ran away, Cole. I left everything behind." Cole said, "Sometimes leaving isn't running away. Sometimes it's choosing to live." Maeve looked at him and said quietly, "Maybe you're right." That afternoon, they went to the market in town. People were starting to notice how close they'd become. Some smiled warmly, others whispered. Maeve didn't mind any more. She walked beside Cole with a small smile on her face, holding a basket of bread and fruit. Cole paid for everything and told her, "You shouldn't worry what people say," Maeve said. "I stopped worrying the day I met you." They rode back home together. The wind was soft and the sky full of small clouds. Maeve leaned forward and said, "Cole, do you ever think about the future?" He said, "Every day." She asked, "What do you see in it?" He paused, then said, "You." Maeve froze for a second. "Me?" she asked. Cole nodded slowly. "Yeah, I see you, Maeve, here, with me." She didn't answer right away. Her heart beat fast and her eyes felt warm. "You really mean that?" she whispered. Cole said, "I wouldn't say it if I didn't." Maeve smiled softly and said, "Then maybe I see the same thing too." That night, the ranch was quiet. Cole fixed the lanterns, while Maeve cooked stew for dinner. They sat across from each other at the table. Cole said, "Feels like we've known each other longer than we have." Maeve said, "Some people just fit. Maybe we're those people." Cole looked at her and said softly, "Maeve, I don't ever want you to leave." She looked down at her hands and said, "I don't want to leave." Then she looked up at him again. "But I'm scared, Cole," he said. "Of what?" she said. "Of losing this. Of losing you." Cole reached across the table and held her hand. "You won't lose me," he said. She looked into his eyes, and for a moment, she believed him. Later, when the moon was high, they walked outside again. The stars were bright over the quiet fields. Cole said, "When I was younger, I thought happiness wasn't for people like me. I thought it belonged to others." Maeve said, "I thought the same thing." Cole smiled gently and said, "Maybe we were both wrong." Maeve took a step closer to him. The air between them felt warm. She whispered, Cole, he said. Yeah, she said. Thank you for seeing me. Cole looked at her and said, how could I not? The night stayed silent, and the only sound was the wind in the grass. For the first time, Maeve didn't whisper that she was nothing special. Because maybe, just maybe, she was starting to believe she was. The next morning came quiet and calm after the storm. The sun rose slow and warm, shining through the thin curtains. Maeve woke up early, the smell of wet earth still in the air. She looked outside and saw Cole already working by the barn, his hat low, his shirt damp from the morning dew. Something in her heart pulled at her when she watched him. It wasn't just admiration anymore. It was love, real, deep love, the kind that didn't need words. Cole came inside soon after. Morning, Irish girl, he said with a small smile. Maeve smiled back. Morning, cowboy, you're up early again, Cole said. Can't waste a good sunrise, Maeve said. You say that every day. Cole laughed and said, and every day. You make it sound new. They sat down to eat together. Maeve made eggs and bread. Cole poured coffee and said, you make the best breakfast this side of Texas, Maeve said. Then you need to travel more, Cole smiled. Don't have to. Everything I need's right here. Maeve blushed, shaking her head. You're always saying things like that, Cole said. Because they're true. After breakfast, Cole asked Maeve to come with him to the pasture. They had to check the fence again after the storm. They rode side by side on Daisy. The fields sparkled from the rain. Birds sang in the trees. Everything felt alive again. When they stopped by the river, Cole looked at Maeve and said, you ever think how strange life is? You came here just passing through. And now I can't imagine this place without you. Maeve smiled and said, I never planned to stay. But something here kept me, Cole said. Something, Maeve said. Someone. Cole's eyes softened. Maeve, he said quietly, when I first saw you in town that day, something about you stopped me. You looked lost, but there was a light in you. I told myself not to care, but I couldn't help it, Maeve said. I thought you were just another quiet cowboy with sad eyes. Cole laughed. Guess we were both wrong, Maeve said. Guess so. They stood near the river bank for a long while, not talking, just listening to the sound of water and the wind through the grass. Cole reached down and picked up a small stone, tossing it across the water. Maeve did the same but missed, splashing her skirt. They both laughed. Cole said, you're not very good at that, Maeve said. Neither are you, Cole grinned. I let you win, Maeve said. You didn't, Cole said. Maybe I didn't want to. The sun rose higher. The world around them was bright and full. Maeve felt her heart grow lighter than ever. When they returned to the ranch, Maeve went inside to change her wet clothes. Cole stayed outside fixing a broken gate. When she came back, she saw him wiping sweat from his brow. She walked over, holding two glasses of lemonade. You look like you could use this, she said. Cole smiled. You always know what I need. Maeve handed him the glass and said, you always say the right thing, Cole said. Only because you make it easy. They sat on the porch after lunch. The ranch was quiet except for the sound of crickets. Maeve leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes. Cole looked at her, and for a long time, he didn't speak. He just watched her. The light hit her hair just right. She looked peaceful, content, alive. Maeve opened her eyes and caught him staring. What? She asked, smiling. Cole shook his head and said softly, why can't I look away? Maeve froze. Her heart skipped. You said that before, she whispered. Cole looked down and nodded. Yeah, I did. But I meant it more now than ever. Maeve stood up slowly. Cole, she said. I need to tell you something. He stood too. What is it? Maeve said. When I came here, I was broken. I didn't think I'd ever feel whole again. But you made me believe in things I'd stopped believing in. You made me believe in me. Cole reached out and touched her cheek gently. You were always whole, Maeve. You just forgot. I just reminded you. Maeve's eyes filled with tears. You don't know what those words mean to me, Cole said. Maybe I do. He took a deep breath. Maeve, he said slowly, I don't want this to end. I don't want to wake up one morning and not see you here. Maeve said softly, then what do you want? Cole stepped closer and said, I want you, here, as my wife. Maeve's eyes widened. Cole, she whispered. Are you sure? Cole smiled gently. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Tears rolled down her cheeks. I don't even have a dress, she said, laughing and crying at the same time. Cole said, I don't care. You could walk out there in boots and mud, and I'd still marry you. Maeve threw her arms around him, laughing through her tears. Then yes, she said. Yes, Cole, I'll marry you. He lifted her off the ground and spun her around, both of them laughing. The ranch dog barked in excitement. The horses neighed as if joining in. That night, under the same sky that once watched their loneliness, they danced barefoot in the grass. No music, no people, just them. Cole whispered, You said you were nothing special. Maeve said, I lied.